we all have difficult lives, that life is characterized in large part by suffering. That there's an inevitable element of suffering in life. And not only is life sorrowful in part, but it's also touched by malevolence, and malevolence of each of us, and the malevolence of our social creations, our societies, and even in some sense the kind of blind malevolence of nature. And so it's a demanding occupation to exist as a human being, and you need something to sustain yourself through that. It's not optional, because the price of existence is so high that without that sustaining meaning, it corrupts you, it embitters you, and once you're embittered, things go downhill rapidly. You get vengeful and you get angry and you get destructive, and there's really no limit to that. And I've been suggesting to people that the sustaining meaning that they can find in their life isn't to be found through happiness, let's say, because happiness doesn't work when you're not happy, when things have gone badly for you, even for accidental reasons. But you can find sustaining meaning in responsibility, and you can take responsibility for yourself. You can do that. And if you take responsibility for yourself, you treat yourself as if you're someone that's worthy of care and discipline. And that has nothing to do with being soft on yourself or the pursuit of pleasure, any of those things. You can take responsibility for yourself, and that works. And then if you do that properly, you can take responsibility for your family. And then if you do that properly, you can take responsibility for your community, and you can continue to burden yourself voluntarily, let's say, with a greater and greater range of existential challenges. And all that does is make more and more and more of you. And that works as an antidote to the catastrophe of life.
When there's a loss emotionally, that translates into biology. So it's not that there's biology here and no emotions here. It's that the emotions and the biology are completely inseparable. And what happens on the emotional plane inevitably will have its manifestations on a biological plane. So what you lose emotionally translates into biological events in your body. And that begins with brain development. Now I began to be interested in brain development when I was diagnosed with ADHD. I was 53, I think, 54, 53. And within a couple of months, 2 of my kids were diagnosed, which seemed to go along with the mainstream medical view that what we've got here is a genetic disorder, which I never bought into for a minute. And why didn't I buy into it? Because although I didn't know anything about the brain or how it developed, I knew something. The tuning out, the absent-mindedness that characterizes ADD is not a disease, inherited or otherwise. What is tuning out? It's an adaptive response to stress. So that if I were to stress you right now, but I mean though that is to be verbally abusive, emotionally insulting, domineering, you would go into a stress state. And how could you deal with it? Well, you could just walk out the door. Or you could stand up and say, you can't talk to me like that, I will not accept it. And if you couldn't walk out, nor did you have the strength to confront me, to fight back, if flight or fight wasn't available to you, there's still a third thing you could do. There are, 100, 200 people here in the room with you, you could ask for help. But what if you couldn't do any of those things? Then how would you handle the stress? Well, you wouldn't. Your brain would handle it by a number of defense mechanisms, the salient of which would be dissociation. You dissociate. All of a sudden, you're not here. Now you're not suffering as much. So it's simply a coping response is all it is. The way we adapt to early stress helps us endure that difficult period in the life of the helpless child, but those same adaptations become source of pathology, threaten your health, threaten the length, your longevity even. So what's adaptive in one situation, what's meant to be a temporary state, becomes a long-term trait. The most significant factor shaping the physiological development of the brain is the emotional relationship with the parenting environment.
There is substantial medical and scientific evidence to show that only when you're in a pleasant state of experience, your body and your brain works at its best. There's no argument about that. There's enough evidence to show that. So whatever impact or success or reaching goals or growth or whatever you say, on one level in the physical world, it's about how well you harness your physiological and your psychological process, isn't it? Whether your body and mind works against you or works for you, this is a big difference. So there is enough evidence to show only when you're in pleasant levels of experience, this happens best. If you're joyful constantly and you have no fear of suffering because you understand all human experience comes from within you, and so you have managed to create the kind of experience that you want, now growth is possible unbridled. If you have the fear of falling down and suffering, you will not go very high, isn't it? The drama around me is happening in so many different ways, but this is a privilege that I've kept for myself. Me being joyful or miserable, me being peaceful or disturbed, these privileges I have not given it to anybody else, I kept them to myself. I think every human being should do that. That the privileges of the nature of your experience must be in your hand. Because when you try to act in the world, there are many forces. All of them will not always cooperate. Sometimes they cooperate, many times they will not cooperate, many times they'll turn against you. This is the nature of the world, that's how it should be. World will never happen 100% your way, and I'm glad it is so, because if it all happened your way, where do I go? I'm glad it's not happening your way. Little bit my way, little bit your way, little bit somebody else's way. That's how the world should be.
Your conflicts, all the difficult things, the problematic situations in your life are not chance or haphazard. They're actually yours. They're specifically yours, designed specifically for you by a part of you that loves you more than anything else. The part of you that loves you more than anything else has created roadblocks to lead you to yourself. You're not gonna go in the right direction unless there's something pricking you in the side telling you, look here, this way. That part of you loves you so much that it doesn't want you to lose the chance. It will go to extreme measures to wake you up. It will make you suffer greatly if you don't listen. What else can it do? That's its purpose. I found this to be true of physical illness and mental problems and everything. You gotta see what is the teaching here. So we can look at all these things as problems to get rid of, which is what the personality wants to do, or we can look at them as learning opportunities, which is what your true self wants to do. So something in you, I would argue, still believes that you're not worthy of care and respect, and that's what gets triggered. So who's the one that doesn't care about you, and who's the one that doesn't think you're worthy of respect?
No, it'd be me.
It'll be you. No, that's a learning.
No, it is.
And this is exactly what you're talking about. You're saying how these difficult things, how these problems are always teaching opportunities. And that's the beauty of healing, is that when you reframe things and you actually see the source within ourselves, all of a sudden, that's liberating. Because guess what? If you're feeling that way because this guy did this or didn't do that, that makes you a victim. But if you see that you're the source, now you're powerful. So whether you're going to hell or you're on the way to heaven, it all happens up here, which is such a powerful teaching, because this is what we can work on. You know, if we're victims of the world, Ramana Maharshi, who's a great Indian guru, he said something like, if your foot hurts when you walk outside, you can do two things. One is to wrap the whole world in burlap, or you can get a pair of shoes. You can see yourself as the victim of the world and trying to change the world so that they won't hurt you anymore, or you can actually empower yourself. And that's what the healing is all about. And anybody listening, I just want to know, it doesn't matter what state of mind you're in, doesn't matter what you're experiencing, it's human, it is transmutable, it is transformable, because that true self that you got disconnected from is still available to you.
It's never been a mystery to me why people are depressed. It's never been a mystery to me why people are anxious and unsettled. It seems obvious why they're concerned and hurt and anxious and unsettled. I think the mystery is how it is that we can conduct ourselves so that that can remain under control. I mean, people deal with very heavy burdens in their life. You know, you don't have to talk to someone for very long. Someone you might be thinking is doing quite well in the world, and sometimes people are. But you don't have to scratch very deep beneath the surface before you find out that they have a family member who has a serious illness, or someone who's suffering through an economic crisis of one form or another, or who there's some source of genuine tragedy 1 degree removed from them, if it's even removed. And most people, even as individuals, have at least one serious problem that they're dealing with. And so it's no mystery that people find it difficult to orient themselves in the world. And the mystery is, well, what can you do about it? And we do know what you can do about it. What you help people do is to identify their problems. That's the first thing, is to confront what's there, the reality of what's there, as bluntly as possible. And so you often end up, as a psychotherapist, talking to people about their array of problems. It's as if they're putting their cards on the table. And you sort out their problems. It's like, and no, they often decide that many of the things that are bothering them are not really that important. They can wait, but that there are crucial life challenges that present themselves to them. And they're not just psychological problems, although sometimes they are. They're problems in life, right? Existential problems. And then what you do is you help people break them down into manageable units, let's say, strategically, and confront them voluntarily. You know, and there's an echo of that idea. There's an echo of that in Christian thinking, and the echo for that is to pick up your cross voluntarily, which is that you have an unavoidable mortal burden to bear in life. There's no escape from it except to directly confront it and to take it on voluntarily.
I don't think you can truly change for the better in a lasting, meaningful way unless it is driven by self-acceptance. The other thing that is just so shocking to me about complacency and self-acceptance is I don't think I have ever come across a single person who was complacent driven by self-acceptance. What differentiates us as a social species is the need to be seen and known and loved, and the need to see and know and love others. And no one rides for free. Like, we all come into this adulthood with hard stuff. Mm-hmm. And what I would say is true about complacency, and 95% of what I see that people call pathology is it's armor. It's not, it's armor. It's behaviors and ways of thinking that I've developed to protect myself from being hurt. What I would say to people is we all grew up and experienced to varying degrees trauma, disappointment, hard stuff. We armored up, and at some point, that armor no longer serves us. And so what I think I would say to that person is, how is not talking about this serving you? And now the weight of the armor is too heavy, and it's not protecting you, it's keeping you from being seen and known by others. This is the question. You know, this is when the universe comes down and puts her hands on your shoulders and pulls you close and whispers in your ear, I'm not fucking around. You're halfway to dead. The armor is keeping you from growing into the gifts I've given you. That is not without penalty. Time is up.
Many people look for meaning in life. as though they will, I'm still searching for meaning and what my life, as though it's going to be under a rock or behind a tree. Well, there's my meaning. And I'm thinking to myself, you have more power than that. You have the power to create meaning in your life rather than passively look for it. So for me, I create the meaning. And meaning to me is, do I know more about the world today than I did yesterday? That enhances meaning for me. And if that accumulates and accrues daily, in a month you know way more than you did than just that day later, so that you continue to grow. Have I, by whatever powers I have available to me, have I lessened the suffering of others? Or the corollary to that would be, have I enhanced the life of others? They're related. And I don't mean, have I devoted the whole day to doing that? Then I would be ignoring myself. But if there's some small gesture that I can do that can completely add value to someone's life, I'm going to do it. Because the leveraging of 10 minutes of my life into the happiness or enlightenment or the reduced suffering of someone else, I'd be irresponsible if I did not. No one ever told me that I had to search for meaning in life to begin with. So that was never even a part of me. It was, I got my life, this is who and what I am, this is what I did in school, these are my dreams, ambitions. How do I create meaning in my life as I go forward? My first question of me wasn't, where do I find meaning? It was, how do I create meaning?
You look at the world through a story. You can't help it. And the story is what gives value to the world, or the story is what you extract from the value of the world. You can look at it either way. You're somewhere and it's not good enough, right? That's the eternal human predicament. Wherever you are isn't good enough. And to some degree, that's actually a good thing, because if it was good enough, well, there's nothing for you to do. So it's actually maybe a good thing that it's insufficient. And that might be why sometimes having less is better than having more. And I don't want to be a Pollyanna about that. I mean, I know that there's deprivation that can reach to the point where it's completely counterproductive. But it isn't always the case that starting with little is, if you start with little, you start with more possibility. It's something like that. So you move always from what's unbearable about the present to some better future, right? And if you don't have that, then you have nothing but threat and negative emotion. You have no positive emotion, because the positive emotion is generated in the conception of the better future and then the evidence that you generate yourself that you're moving towards it. That's where the positive and fulfilling meaning of life comes. So you want to set up this structure properly. It's very, very important. And so what it means is that you want to be going somewhere that's good enough so that the going is worth the while. And you can ask yourself that. And we know what's wrong with life. It's rife with suffering and insufficiency and deception and evil. It's all of that, obviously. Okay, what would make the journey worthwhile? Well, you can ask yourself that. It's like, all right, in order to bear up under this load, what is it that I would need to be striving to attain? And if you ask yourself that, that's to knock and the door will open. That's what that means. If you ask yourself that, then you will find an answer, and you'll shrink away from it. You'll think, well, there's no way I could do that. It's like, well, you don't know what you could do. You don't know what's possible. And you're not as much as you could be. And so God only knows what you could do and have and give if you sacrificed everything to it. That the act of sacrificing something might have some dramatic compulsion to it, might be a way of indicating to yourself that you're actually serious about something. And certainly in the Abrahamic stories, one of the things that maintains Abraham's covenant with God is his continual willingness to sacrifice. And that sacrificial issue is so important, because you are not committed to something unless you're willing to sacrifice for it. Commitment and sacrifice are the same thing. And I think it borders on miraculous that those concepts are embedded into this narrative at the level of dramatic action, instead of abstract explanation. People are acting this out. And the fundamental conception is so profound that it's really quite awe-inspiring. It's breathtaking, really, when you understand what message is trying to be conveyed. You have to make sacrifices. And what do you have to sacrifice? You have to sacrifice that which is most valuable to you currently that's stopping you. And God only knows what that is. It's certainly the worst of you. It's certainly that. And God only knows to what degree you're in love with the worst of you.